the receding shoreline is making people also follow the lake. So this is leading to migration from different countries to other countries. And obviously, there is a conflict because people move from one country to another country, like let's say from Nigeria to Chad or Cameroon or something, and there is conflict there because of, migration rules and regulations within the country. You are Nigerians and you are in a different country. I mean, it's really created a whole lot of conflicts and issues, which, it's quite serious that if we do not manage the resources very well, it will also bring all kinds of difficulties within countries as well.
Okay, thank you. And also to remind that in the case of Lake Chad, there is also the issue of terrorist groups, also the Boko Haram, conquering this region and adding to one more stress. Patricia, anything on that?
Just the question of refugees and people leaving areas that are water stressed is something that the world is not very well equipped to deal with. I think that people migrate, people move with their feet. We're not like trees rooted in the ground. And when the conditions change and we need to go to a better place, these fictitious borders with guards at them are something that is also pretty much a post-colonial phenomenon, and it, in times of climate change, is not a very adaptable or resilient solution to problems that might be resolved in other ways if people could actually move freely, like capital can.
Thank you. So are governments in Africa and in the small islands really preparing for this widely anticipated consequences of floods, droughts, migration, everything that comes with climate change? I see the two of them immediately reacting.
Can I just comment?
Just be frank.
Yeah, no, not all of them. Can I just comment from the private sector perspective, because I come from a company that is specializing in water and sanitation in the continent. We've been in this business for 46 years. Recently, we won an award for an international best project in terms of water transfer scheme, which is in Botswana. And we're doing the same in different countries across the continent. But one thing as an advisor to government in terms of how to use the water resource that is available for socio-economic development, Deborah, the issue is not all governments would listen to the solutions.
Why?
And let me first say, before I answer why, to say that we are aware that you cannot use the same advice for all countries. All solutions are tailor-made for the conditions of the particular country. And it all also depends on what the government want to use the water for, that you will provide solutions. So, and we have learned that for those countries where advice is taken and where those solutions are tailor-made and are used for local conditions, those countries actually are ready and they are successful in the utilization of water, whether it's from using grey water for agriculture to dripping irrigation to water swapping and so on and so on. The major issue is the governance structures, Deborah, that if political will is not there, you can advise until you're blue in the face. But where there's political will and where there's commitment and where there's understanding of the importance of water and sanitation, I have seen those countries succeed.
Wonderful. We're talking about political will in governments. What about grassroots, communities? We're talking top-down.
I'm not sure if you had something else.
Yeah, do you have patience?
I
Would
was
you like to add?
actually going to talk about how it's being governed, and I think at least I know that we in West Africa we have a Volta Basin Authority, which comprises 6 countries using the Volta. I also know that there's a Nile Basin Initiative, you know, because for the Volta Basin, the authority tries to look at developing joint projects, looking at national policies, you know, to be able to look at poverty alleviation, socioeconomic development, and sustainable development as well. So for the 6 countries, I think these are some of the major issues that they are looking at. The Nile Basin Initiative, I think they also are trying to look at the different uses, the different activities that, you know, the different 10 or so countries can undertake to be able to make it more, you know, user-friendly for all the countries involved. So those are at least 2 of the
Yeah, let me just add to what you're saying, because from the Southern Africa side, in Southern Africa, we've got Lesotho Highlands. Lesotho is known to transport water from Lesotho to different parts of South Africa. South Africa is inland, and we don't have lots of water basins. And currently, what is quite interesting in the Southern African community is that the South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, and Namibia, they're starting to talk to creating a water transfer scheme that will go through to Botswana, and that will go through to Zambia, also to Namibia from Lesotho. So it actually tells you that it is possible to transport water from any country to another country where there's water shortage. The only thing that is important is the political will of those different countries talking to one another and understanding that water is a heavenly given, I nearly used another GD term, a heavenly given natural resource that belongs to all of us in the globe.
Well, just to wrap up this conversation, she mentioned political will. Is there political will? I mean, you deal more directly with governments, no?
Well, I think that there is somehow, but I think it should be more effective, you know, to try to ensure that whatever policies have been put in place within the sub-region should be implemented to be able to get, you know, a good outcome for all countries. Yeah.
So as an academic, can I just add some insights from theory here?
Definitely.
Eleanor Ostrom was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Economics, and she won it in 2009 for her work on the conditions, empirical work, on the conditions under which people are able to develop the trust and the reciprocity necessary to govern large-scale common systems, like watersheds or aquifers or large-scale natural resource questions. And one of the insights that she developed from her empirical work is that what she calls polycentric governance systems. That means not just simply, you know, the municipality relates to the county, relates to the national government, relates to some international body in a straight line hierarchy. But governance, when you think of governance as including things like watershed authorities and NGOs which link people at the local level, perhaps women, you know, for green gardening or green roofs, and also government bodies that link across scales. In other words, things that disrupt those hierarchies can be very useful for providing resilience. And that idea of resilience is something that often politicians and governments don't want to talk about because they say, we have the power, we have the authority, we were elected to do this. But in times of climate change, it seems to me that we need to be looking more towards these resilient systems that may, in fact, duplicate some of the of the purposes and of the functions of each other, but exactly because they're less co-optable, less capturable by elites, and more responsive to grassroots initiatives.
Okay, let's try to let's try to look at solutions. Patricia, I mean, people from the South, they tend to compare themselves to the West, right? I come from the South, by the way. So you do a lot of research on how countries produce knowledge. The best solutions can be found locally, or should Africans and small islands look for answers outside?
Most of what I've learned about watersheds, I've learned in the Global South. I've learned from colleagues in Brazil, where the Paraná La Plata watershed is dammed by the huge Itaipu Dam, which is between Brazil and Paraguay and Argentina. But some of the money that's gained from selling the hydropower on that dam is plowed back into the local area to address and remediate the local effects of having built that dam. And under the progressive government in Brazil, it's been used to create a watershed authority that brings people together from the 5 countries in the watershed to talk about how they're all being affected. So you have all kinds of different governance structures in the different countries, but they are talking to each other. And if you think of a watershed is really like a roughly bowl. You know, there's high levels and low levels. And the water, which falls through Earth's natural distilling system, water falls at the high levels of the watershed in a very pure state, because it's pure water. It's come from the clouds. And it falls and comes down in these kind of, you know, interlocking, beautiful stream systems. And what happens in the lower levels of the watershed is really affected by what happens above. And so whether it's herding or whether it's agriculture, whether the agricultural processes are sustainable, whether too much fertilizer or pesticides is used, where people live and the industry, all of those things affect what comes down and comes out at the mouth of the river. So it seems to me that at that scale, that is a bioregional way of thinking about governance. It does, you know, the natural boundaries can cross the watershed in all kinds of ways, but in times of climate change, it seems to me that we need to start thinking about those bioregional scales at which people have to learn how to interact and communicate with each other.
What about sanitation systems?
Oh, well, let someone else talk.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let me move to Snowy. I mean, your company, your company, BigenAfrica, has been advising governments on concrete projects on how to build sustainable infrastructure across Africa. What are the good examples? What steps should African and small islands take? What are the best projects?
Well, I've got a table, if they can just show it. It's the second table. I've got 2 slides, just the other one. This one, I just wanted to show, Deborah, the risks that have been shown by WEF in terms of, if you look at the impact of climate change on water and sanitation. And just go to the second slide. That table actually it's very difficult to speak to the different solutions. This is one of the tables that shows water. But in terms of sanitation, there's a lot of approaches that one can use depending on the country and also the sector. For example, if you look at water, which is sanitation as well, in terms of the industry and in terms of domestic, what type of sanitation systems do you want to have? Okay. The one thing that I think I want to dispel as a myth, that there's something wrong with pit toilets, for example.
I knew this was going to come up.
Water is a scarce resource, and we cannot keep on flushing and flushing and flushing water without actually even capturing the gray water and use that water for something else. Okay. Many of us get into the bathroom, and I'm sure even when here at the hotel, I know ladies, we do that. You get into a bathroom, you open the tap, and you fill the bath with hot water. When you finish, you wash, and then you just flush it. So where this water is going, nobody cares.
Okay.
So I think it's important that solutions that we provide should be solutions that are tailor-made for different countries and in terms of the level of development of those countries. There are countries, and I don't want to mention it because it's like a swear word, that uses paper plastics as toilets and burying those plastics and paper in a manner that it actually protects the environment.
Just name it. Do it. Courage.
No, but it's actually called SHIT program. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. It stands for Sanitation, Health, Innovative Technology.
Patience.
Well, this is quite interesting. I haven't heard that word before, but
Me neither.
yeah, I think when it comes to sanitation, in fact, at least in my country, I think we need to do a lot more because, yes, we are looking at water and there's a lot to be done in terms of advocacy and awareness creation because, you know, like you mentioned, the gray water, if you're able to process them and use them for other things like, you know, watering gardens and irrigation and that kind of thing. But sometimes it's difficult for people to accept that you're using gray water. So I think there's the need for us to really do a lot of awareness creation and education on that one.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to flush toilets. Because
Yeah, can I just say, I agree about education. When I was working with some colleagues and partners in South Africa, in Durban, we were, in Durban, the piped infrastructure goes out so far, and then there are suburbs where people live farther away, and they don't have access to piped sanitation. And so these pit latrines have been installed, and it's a cause of quite some social problems. There's a student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal who wrote a paper called "We Want to Experience the Flush." In other words, why do those people downtown with their swimming pools have plenty of water when someone has made the decision that the piped sanitation can only extend so far? And you know, this is a real political issue. But let me just say that in Toronto, where I live, the drinking water is taken from Lake Ontario. It's pumped up to a reservoir where it's chlorinated, settled out, then it's pumped farther up the hill and pumped up into skyscrapers. And Toronto uses more energy to pump water around than it does for any other purpose, including the subway system, right? So this is where the water system interacts and intersects with the energy system. We don't have the energy to have water-based sanitation, I don't think. Anyway, once it's been flushed or used or run down the drains, where does it go? Right back into Lake Ontario, right? So it's not as if it goes downstream and is somebody else's problem. It is our problem. And the other thing that's happening is that the infrastructure that was built for the piped water sanitation system is 100 years old, and it's now leaking. A third of the water that goes into the system leaks out, causing potholes and erosion of the asphalt on the streets, which costs money to fix. And the whole infrastructure has to be replaced now because it's 100 years old. So water bills are going up 8 or 9% a year in order to pay for that infrastructure. The question you have to ask is, should we really be replacing that infrastructure, or should we not be providing incentives for people to remove themselves from that particular grid by having access to the safe technologies that do exist, as you point out, for sanitation. We don't have to pollute all that water and use all that energy for water-based sanitation. But this is it requires grassroots education, it requires consciousness raising, and it has to be something that people see as a positive alternative, not something that's being forced down their throat like that cat. That was a great picture.
Thank you, Patricia. Let's get some questions from the floor. I'm sure you have some interesting questions for this panel. So please identify yourself. Yes, there's... Yes. Well,
Testing.
yes.
Mine is sort of more of a comment, actually. Since we're talking about solutions, I just think that it's one of those things that I don't want us to wrap up this session and leave it hanging. The issue of pit latrines. I actually have a real problem with that. I'm sorry. We're talking about realistic and practical solutions, but I think pit latrines are going to take us all the way back to, the Middle Ages. That's how I see it. And I think that poor planning on the part of our governments cannot be our problem. We cannot make those our own emergencies. I feel very strongly about it. I don't know what the panel has to say.
Reactions from the panel?
Yeah, no, I know that, as you said, that even in South Africa, the issue of basic services is a huge thing. But I think unless you understand the technology of pit latrines, then you'll appreciate the usefulness of pit latrines. And I know that for communities that cannot afford water, it's better than going to the bush and be bitten by snakes and have a pit latrine. And a pit latrine that is safe, that is hygienic, that is usable in a manner that it gives dignity to human beings than women going into the bush. So for me, it's a first step, my sister. Yes, if you want to develop from pit latrines to flush toilets, at least you do have a system. And the solutions that we provide that starts with pit latrines can be converted later on into flushing toilets when you have water. And just for your information quickly, we're starting to do rainwater and fog harvesting. So with rainwater, then we're using rainwater to flush those pit toilets. So it's an evolutionary system. So be comforted, it's hygienic, it's safe. No children will fall into the pit hole like they used to in the past. So it's new technology.
Patients,
I can
do you have
comfort you.
anything? Well, thank you. Let me take one question from this side, and then I'll go back to this side, okay? Just to be fair to both sides.
All right. Thank you for this session. Rama Sofia Rajdir, United States Press Agency. As we're talking about the water shortage, and on the other hand, there is a huge business in terms of opportunities of making opportunities in exchanging or buying. I don't know if we can buy. You were speaking about the policies and governance. My question is regarding the, is there any water trading rights and water pricing to manage this demand? Thank you.
To whom are you addressing the question? Yes. Patients, maybe?
Well, I think, yes, I think that there is, particularly in the...
The water authorities in every
Yes.
country, they will use that. Actually, one of the examples that I've given is the water pricing and water tariffs, what we call social pricing, which takes into consideration the poor households. We call them indigenous households. In South Africa, we do have an indigent policy. That policy takes into consideration if a household cannot afford to pay for the full price of water, and then they provide a certain limited number of liters per day to that particular family without paying. And then once you exceed the allocated liters, you start paying.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
is what
Patient.
we also have, at least in Ghana. You have a minimum for the household. Over that, then you pay extra, which becomes quite astronomical, depending on how much you yes, you have.
If you have a pool, she said.
But the idea is to help households to preserve water. Because you know that if you only use the allocated liters to do your laundry, to cook, and to wash, then you know you don't have to pay for water. Okay. So most households will do that, stay within the limits.
Thank you. I'll take one more question here.
It's more of a comment than a question. Patricia Dehukum Singh from Mauritius. I'm in education and training, and I also have been translating some of the documents from the IOC on rainwater harvesting. I think when we add on, we say Africa and small island states, which has been a little bit the case the last two sessions. We need to stop making an amalgam between the size of Africa, Latin America, etc. In the island states, Mauritius being one, obviously, the whole mathematics are completely different. 1.3 million, 80 kilometers by 50 kilometers to do everything, to put everything. Now, Mauritius, in point of fact, is doing quite a lot of work towards water with a very old system which is starting to tell us it needs to be doing. And the problem with the small island states is that many of them are successful, and the donors are telling us we're in the middle income, so we don't qualify for the funding very often that we need. We have a lot of expertise in Mauritius, but we need the expertise outside. Now, I'm making a straightforward case right now for the SIDS, which this country has won, to say that we need a different response which is scaled to the size of a country like Mauritius, which has been very successful. There's a lot of grey water use, etc., outside in this for the golf course and everything. But sanitation, we have issues, but we've got a lot not so great as in Africa. Infant mortality has been down for many, many years because we've got better water. But my point is, I'd really like to see the conversations on the issues make a definite difference between the size of African countries and the fact that when you're on an island and you've got 4 hours to get to the island, it's a different situation. So I really would like us to think.
That's a very good point. Who would like to talk about that?
Can I just answer that with regard to the inspiration and the wonderful ideas that I think small island states can offer to other places where it's easier to externalize the costs, the environmental costs and the social costs of wasteful behavior. On an island, you can't do that. And so you have to pay attention to these issues of watersheds and of using the water as many times. One of the things that ecological economists like to think about is the points of tangency between resource flows and economic value. So if you have water falling from the sky, if it can be used by people several times on its way to the sea, then that is creating value each time it's used. If gray water can be harvested and used in gardens, if even human waste can be harvested and used for soil, as long as the waste itself is not toxic, depending on what the people ate and what they took to prevent pregnancy or to prevent tuberculosis or cancer or whatever, that'll be in their waste. And so we have to think of all of these things in systems terms. And I think small island states, as you point out, give us a really good model and an inspiration. If you can do it in Mauritius, then the solutions that you develop, no, they can't be applied in a rubber stamp way in other places, but they can certainly be inspirational. And I think that's where academics come in, and that's why a research methodology that employs academics and places students with NGOs and community-based organizations that are grappling with these problems at the grassroots and asking people, what is it that you see as the vision? How do you depend on each other? What's going to happen here? Then if the academics, the students take those ideas back to their profs, the profs write them up with the students and get them published in journals, that becomes understood internationally, and then somebody in Cape Verde or Fernando Noronha or somewhere can look at those ideas and say, hey, we could adapt that in a way that'll be relevant to our situation. I think that is a model for change in this time, and taking advantage of the internet, taking advantage of the communications that we have. But we do have to do it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was just going to say that is why, one of the reasons why I agree with what Lord Boateng said earlier on, that we need to look at ourselves on the continent and to be able to share ideas, do things ourselves. So if, let's say, Mauritius has done something in terms of either rain harvesting or something, we can share it, and it could be done also in Ghana, in some parts of Nigeria, or something like that. So I think it is very important for us to actually think about looking at things ourselves. Thank you.
Wonderful. That's a great.
Right.
So
So-
solution is just next door.
Right.
May I take, oh my God, okay.
Well,
Let me give space for a man.
Okay, thank you. Actually, the last speaker just mentioned one of the questions I was going to raise, which is, I haven't had discussions around Africa having an open, unfettered innovation centers that actually look into a problem, where the government says, okay, we are not going to encumber you with a lot of other things, but we let the students passionately follow their own passion and then develop solutions to our problems, including water, including agriculture. It's good to look for aid. As somebody once told me, when we get cash in terms of need, it's okay, but it's not sustainable. You can't depend on it forever. That's why we have to create this future using our own labor and capital, intelligence, to be able to do all of those. So I would like to hear more, or at least push our governments to be able to spend more money, more effort on looking for the solutions inside of us as opposed to, looking for assistance outside. Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, having worked for a development financing institution that funds infrastructure, especially water in the continent, I wish we had more time because I want to put a proposal to say that there are all these green funds, climate funds, women's funds, all sorts of funds that are available in the continent that we can leverage, including the donor funding, that we need to put a fund for this continent, a climate fund that pulls through all the various aspects of climate change. And I think the Africa Development Bank last month, they announced the funding for climate change and also funding for women. So we need to bring women in the continent together and see if we cannot create a consolidated fund that will address some of the challenges that we are facing. Donor funding, project preparation funding. Commercial banks also can give us what we call smart money funding or cheap funding as well.
Okay, there's one question
One
there,
more-
and then
one
I'll
more
get
brief
back
one.
to you.
I think we all collectively in this room can agree that water is a big problem and that it's all of our problems. But keeping this very solution-based, I'm curious to know from the panelists, what would be your single most impactful choice for really building resilient water systems?
Wow. Thank you for the question. So who would like to answer
For
that?
me, it has to be a global transition towards wanting dry sanitation, for moving beyond the 200-year episode. I mean, flush toilets were invented in 1755, around the same time as fossil fuels began to be used. And we're through that phase now. We're through peak oil, we're through peak water. We have to move back to a more ecological way of living on the earth. I think that, and it, as we've been saying, it has to be something that people want and that people see the value of, and that is part of a progressive change towards a better way of living on the earth, not seeing something as moving back to the dark ages.
Well, I also
Patience.
think that there's the need to have an effective integrated water management on the continent, effective one, within all the different basins that we have.
More collaboration then.
Yeah, from my side, it's actually mixed water. Let us all in our homes use rainwater, put rainwater tanks and use the water for something else, grey water and clean water. I think if we do that, we'll be able to drive sustainable climate change from a water perspective.
Thank you. I have one more question
Thank
here.
you. I agree with the point you made about focusing on Mauritius in particular, but also even for Africa. It's also a mistake to actually just talk about Africa as if it's a one but I agree with you. But I'm wondering where seawater fits in this water conversation. Seawater. We have the Atlantic Ocean, we have the Indian Ocean. In fact, in Ghana, what we have done recently is to do a desalination project to provide drinking water to a community. And we have lots of seawater coming home and disturbing us.
Yeah, I agree with that. Desalination is the in thing. However, in some of the countries, desalination is an expensive process. So desalination becomes a last resort in terms of the advice that can be given. But it is important. It can be used not only even for drinking, but also for agriculture in some of the areas. You can use for flushing for toilets, of course. Our special advisor to the president, yes, you can advise this.
Any more questions? From this side, I have the tendency to look always to the same side. Yeah, one more.
Peut-être pas une question, mais sur l'île de la Réunion, on utilise la récupération d'eau de pluie, notamment sur les toits quand la pluie tombe. Nous avons des gouttières. Au bas des gouttières, il y a dans la terre des bacs qui récupèrent donc l'eau de pluie et qui permet d'être utilisée pour les toilettes et pour faire la vaisselle. Donc je ne sais pas si ces systèmes sont connus dans les autres pays, mais nous avons en tout cas des experts sur notre île de la Réunion en ce domaine.
Okay, just a comment here from Île de Réunion that they use rainwater system. Any comment on that?
Yeah, again, an example from Brazil. In the dry northeast part of Brazil, they have a program now called 1 Million Cisterns. And they are trying to build 1 million cisterns in the country to harvest rainwater and make it available over a longer period of time. And one of the aspects of that program is that they are also training women to build those cisterns, which means training women in concrete construction skills, which the women can then use for other things besides building cisterns. So I think this is, for me, it's an example of how you take a lemon and you make lemonade, right? You take the situation and you make it into something that creates resilience in more ways than one. And I think that's how we have to start thinking. We have to be efficient that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to conclude, I mean, there seems to have a lot of richness and expertise in small islands and in many African countries. Why aren't we using that? Just a last question to conclude.
No, we are. That is why that is why we're having these discussions. And I think the issue of ensuring that whatever that we discuss also, we should not just generalize. It's actually country-specific, region-specific, sector-specific, and system-specific. So for Mauritius, I just want to say there's so many lessons. I'm privileged because we've got a company here in Mauritius, so I understand the country. There are so many lessons that we can take, and I wish we had a session where we're discussing the case study of Mauritius in terms of what they're doing in the sector. That would have been great, because I've read all the president's books in terms of the plans and so on, and it's a pity that we don't have it.
Thank you. Last word from patients from.
If you take us up on that, I think there's enough people enough Mauritians in the room, men and women. If you want to give us a half an hour, I think we could rustle that up for you.
That will be great.
That's very good. Okay. Last word from patients.
Yes, I think that we can learn from each other, because different countries, looking at our diversity, are doing so many different things, and we need to learn from each other and build each other up in terms of the different programs and activities that countries are undertaking.
Patricia?
I just wanted to mention a few very specific examples of things that people are doing that I know about through projects that I've done with partners in Kenya and Mozambique and South Africa. In Kenya, in the Kibera slum, there's an area where the Nairobi River floods when it rains too much, and this is young men and young women, have taken that area, which is part of the floodplain, and turned it into a soccer field. They've upgraded it. They've made it possible for people to sell, peanuts and things when people are playing soccer. It becomes a safe space in the center of a very dangerous slum, which is also a flood buffer. So the need for recreation spaces is something that's important in cities, and you can use the fact that climate change is causing rivers to flood to press politically for those spaces. In Maputo, they are making climate change education in the schools, and the NGO is brought into the schools to help with educating youth about climate change. And in Durban, there are programs around bringing women together and also seniors together to talk about the changes in the local watersheds and what should be done politically to address them. So there are so many examples of things that people are doing in many places.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think that's the end of the session. Gillian?
Okay, so thank you very much, Deborah, and thanks to all our speakers. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
And please get together, because I think there are enough solutions in the room. There is a lot of knowledge about solutions in the room, so just get together and share.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And an opportunity for that is coming up next. So
Exactly.
we're going to go off, and we'll be seeing you again, actually, coming back to the health issue with you a little bit later. So
Okay.
thank
you
you
very
again,
much.
Deborah. Thank you. Just a couple of quick announcements before we go off to our networking break. So if you're a next generation leader, a part of that group, please meet in the media room just for about 5 minutes at the break. That's the tent outside. You might also want to take the opportunity to give back your headsets. The people from interpretation are always very happy to have them back. You can always collect them again when you come back. Please don't take it home with you tonight as well. So just a little plug to give that back to people. And otherwise, please enjoy your networking break. We'll see you back here for another of our Amazing Women episodes at 5:05. So please enjoy your break. Thank you very much.